Hey, what's up? It's Symphony here. Subscribe to my brother Mr. Creepy as Hell channel, and when you're watching his videos, make sure you stay in one piece. Peace, peace, peace.
Every time I hear about kids having imaginary friends, it gives me chills, especially what happened to me and my son Robert. This happened about 3 years ago. My son at the time was about 4 years old, and he started talking to himself. He would tell me that he had an imaginary friend named Penny, and I usually would let it go because it's normal for kids his age to talk or play with their imaginary friend. I was going on about my business until I heard my son crying. When I came up and asked my son what happened, my son would just tell me that his imaginary friend named Penny would tell him to harm himself. Right there, that was red flags that started to go off in my head. I started to get concerned, thinking that maybe something was wrong with my son. So I took him to go see a specialist. When the specialist examined my son, it turned out that he didn't have anything wrong with him, which I was happy about. But it still kind of disturbed me, wondering why he would say his imaginary friend Penny told him to harm himself. I would later come to find out. A week later, I was finishing washing up the dishes after making dinner for me and my son. My son once again was talking to his imaginary friend, and I was listening to make sure everything was alright. Most of the time my son was just laughing and giggling, so I continued to wash the dishes. That wasn't until I heard my son screaming and crying. I cut off the water and I quickly went into my son's room. When I got in his room, I was gonna ask him was he alright, but then I stopped dead in my tracks and I looked by my son's closet, and that's when I saw it. It was a woman standing in my son's closet. She had on a tore up white dress, and she had scars all over her body. The woman, which I wanted to presume she looked like she was in her mid-30s, but she looked like she was much older. I looked at the woman, and I immediately grabbed my son, and I closed his room door, and I called 911 to let them know about the woman that was in my son's room. When the cops arrived, they arrested the woman, and I later found out that she's had several brushes with the law. Her name was indeed Penny, and she's had a history of drug use. The way she was getting into my house was because she would knock on my son's window, and my son, who didn't know any better, would let her in, and she'll crawl into my son's room and play with him and tell him all these disturbing things. After the cops left with the woman, I made sure to get my son some help because there was no telling what this woman said to him. A few months later, my son seems to be alright, and I made sure to get extra security, especially in my son's room. I also made sure to file a restraining order against this woman to make sure she comes nowhere near me and my son. I'm just glad that I was able to catch what was going on quickly because there was no way of knowing Penny's intentions for my son.